Okay, everybody, thank you very, very much indeed for being here on this episode of the MirYam Institute webinar. I'm sorry for the lack of advanced advertising on this occasion. It's because we moved the date, but I'm very pleased for all of you who are here, and of course for our audience that's going to be listening to this and indeed watching it on JBS TV. Thank you very much, one and all. And I want to begin as ever by thanking my colleagues at the MirYam Institute. Thank you very much for helping us to bring this about. And we've got a couple of very, very interesting subjects to talk about today. But first of all, before I welcome our speaker, let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Of course, his name is Ambassador Danny Ayalon, and he served as Israel's ambassador to the United States of America from July 2002 to November 2006, during which time relations between the two countries reached an all-time high. It's quite a statement, but I believe it to be true. Strategic, political, and economic ties were deepened and expanded across the board. Danny Ayalon played a leading role in securing the agreement for $10 billion in US grants and loan guarantees to Israel. He also played a role in the roadmap to peace, the historic exchange of letters between President Bush and Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, and the bilateral trade that reached $20 billion and another $10 billion in investment. From 1997 to 2002, Danny served as foreign policy advisor to Prime Ministers Benjamin Netanyahu and Ehud Barak, and as chief foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. As a member of Israel's Foreign Service from 1989 to 1997, he represented Israel as consul in Panama and as a member of Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations. Before government service, Danny Ayalon worked in the private sector as a senior financial executive. He is a publishing expert at the MirYam Institute and also a graduate of Tel Aviv University with a BA in Economics and Labor Studies, and he also earned his MBA from Bowling Green State University in Ohio. It's a great pleasure to have you with us here today, Danny. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure, Benjamin. Always good to be with you and with the MirYam Institute. I also would like to encourage all our viewers and the future listeners to also join the MirYam Institute podcast, which I'm very honored to host together with my friend Chuck Freilich, which was the Deputy National Security Council of Israel. And tomorrow, I believe, Friday, is where we will release the next one. It's a bi-weekly. And anyone who would like to dwell more into these issues is invited to this podcast.
So I really appreciate you starting there, because that's where I wanted to start. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Turkey, but I'm not going to delve too much into that subject, and particularly the renewal of ties between Israel and Turkey that's just been announced. But as you mentioned, you are 50% of the IDDF podcast, the Israel Diplomacy and Defense Forum podcast. And that podcast is a product, as you mentioned, of the MirYam Institute, and is indeed hosted by Professor Chuck Freilich, who's a former Deputy National Security Advisor, and yourself. I know that you've mentioned a little bit about it, but I want you to tell us a little bit more about that podcast in your own words. What can listeners expect in general to hear from you and from Chuck? And what have you got coming up in this episode of the IDDF podcast, which, as you mentioned, will take place and be released actually on Friday, tomorrow?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think this podcast is unique in the sense that the two of us, both Chuck and myself, come not only from academic background, but also with a very, very practical experience of many, many years. We have not just talked or analyzed the issues, we were just dealing with these issues, we were negotiating, we were formalizing policies, we were meeting the other side. So a lot of this experience is actually being manifested in this podcast as we also relate to practical experience and draw conclusions from that also to the future. Also, I think what makes it very interesting is that both of us are coming from slightly different angles. I would say Chuck may be a little bit left of center, I'm right of center, but quite amazingly, there are many, many common fields of agreement. And I would say what we talk not only from a position, or I would say more, we speak on the merit of issues as we analyze it than from a position. So as we both emphasize on this podcast, there is no right or left. It's only right, the right policies and the right things we believe the world, Israel, the United States, and other like-minded countries should pursue.
You know, I really do like what you've said and what you've described there. And the reason that we wanted to get that going here, and we're so pleased to have Chuck and you engaged in that podcast, Danny, is because the tone of political discourse is getting ever worse. It's ever worsening. It's plumbing new depths all the time. I'm actually going to talk about this during our interview because we're going to talk about the Israeli elections in due course. But the reality of the matter is that the two of you from the center right, Chuck from the center left, or right and left sides of the political spectrum, the two of you are both equally committed to a strong, secure future for Israel, the country, and Israel, the people, wherever they may be. You may differ on how to achieve that outcome here and there, but when you do so, you differ candidly, you do so with substance at the base of your argumentation. Why do you think you and Chuck manage to have these candid exchanges? Why is it that you can sit down, joust verbally for an hour, sometimes even longer each episode, and still come out shaking hands and with a pat on the back and mutual appreciation?
Well, Benjamin, I think first and foremost, it's mutual respect and appreciation, not just to the personalities, but also to the ideas. And also, we do not come out of the position, so we say what we think. So this really opens a wide range of issues to be discussed without any kind of political baggage to it. We say it as we believe in it. And tomorrow, for instance, we're also going to discuss a few issues which are very, very apropos relevant to what's happening. Turkey, of course, will be one of the issues that we will discuss tomorrow. So whatever is left out here, I would encourage people to join. They will get a lot more also from the webinar tomorrow. Of course, Iran will be high on the agenda as we speak. We are still waiting for the outcome of the negotiations. Iran and the United States. Now it's kind of the last minute pressure on all sides. So this is also discussed, the ramifications, outcome, possibilities, the road ahead. All this is also discussed both on the issue of Turkey and Iran. And of course, some aftermath of the Breaking Dawn operation in Gaza about 3 weeks ago. Interesting. It would be very interesting for anyone to listen to.
Well, I always enjoy listening to it. I learn from it personally, and I tend to listen to it during my workouts. If I'm on the running along the beach or in the gym or some such thing, that's when I really have the opportunity to tune in. So I encourage everyone to do that. They can subscribe to it right on our channel, which is on anywhere that they listen to their podcasts, whether it's iTunes or whether it's Spotify or anywhere else. And of course, as with many things here at the Institute, we provide this for free for the consumer. The consumer has the opportunity to listen to two foremost experts internationally on subjects central to the story of the Jewish people right now. So that's the IDDF podcast, and you just look for the MirYam Institute on your podcast channel, and please do subscribe. Now, Danny, I'm going to get right to it, and I mentioned that I'm only going to deal with this obliquely because I know that you and Chuck are going to tackle it in depth. But look here, Turkey and Israel have renewed full diplomatic relations. Those relations, Danny, broke down, well, broke really, didn't just break down, they broke in January 2009 in public when then Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan stormed off the stage at Davos, a stage that he was sharing with then Israeli President Shimon Peres. And as he did so, he accused Israel of war crimes against the Palestinian Arabs. All of this took place in the aftermath of Operation Cast Lead, Israel's defensive operation inside the Gaza Strip, which went from the end of 2008 to the beginning of 2009. And since that time, I would say that now President Erdogan has shown himself to be a double-dyed anti-Semite. I actually think that he hates Jews, this individual. He's a man who is very comfortable dealing in Jew-hating tropes and someone who is clearly adversarial toward Israel. He didn't look particularly happy when he shook hands with Israel's President Isaac Herzog there. And I would like to just ask you, Danny, what are the reasons for his readiness, not ours, because we know Israel has its hand extended in friendship to its neighbors. What is the reason for his readiness to restore ties with Israel? Let's start there, and then I'll come into the elections.
Yeah, first of all, of course, we should not be fooled by this charm offense by Erdogan, because it has his own political, personal, and national interests for Turkey as well. As you mentioned, 2009 marked the real breakdown or breaking or beginning of the deterioration, or maybe the height of deterioration of relationship with Turkey. It started really in 2002, from the day Erdogan entered the prime minister's and then president's office in Ankara. And we have to remember that Erdogan is an Islamist, as his party, the AKP party, is basically of the same ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. So I would say the AKP is like a Turkish Hamas or a Turkish Muslim Brotherhood. You have the Arab Muslim Brotherhood and you have the Turkish one, and this is what he represents. So I would say single-handedly, Benjamin, he turned relations into the worst. And the reason he is so much keen of reestablishing full normalizations with the exchange of ambassadors, I would say, is a very, very positive development from Israel's point of view. Why? Because he is doing it. I mean, this is Turkey's actually request, and this shows Israel's strength and power in the region, and becoming really a central, I would say, anchor here of stability and of development and of future prosperity. We have become a real hub. We have the Gulf countries now normalizing relationship. Of course, Egypt and Jordan. More countries are pretty much waiting. And of course, if we look into the Western side, a real true alliance with Cyprus and Greece, which are like-minded countries to democracies, very much indeed are concerned now about this new or renewal of a more intimate relationship with Turkey. But this is something which is very much on our mind, to mention to them that any development of relations with Turkey will not be in any way or shape on the expense of our relationship with Cyprus and Greece. With them, we know they are predictable, they're stable, and they are long-term. With Erdogan, unfortunately, we do not know when or how things may go, sour again. We hope not, but we are, in any case, have to be very, very cautious about it. So, of course, it's a good development. Turkey, after all, it's a major country in the region. Basically, there are three. I would say the three major powers in the Middle East today are Iran, Turkey, and Israel. Incidentally, if you look into it, they are not Arab countries. The three most important countries today in the region, in the Arab Middle East, are not Arab. So it is good to have relations with Turkey, and again, especially that when they are the ones coming and requesting it. But we have to be very, very careful, and we know how easily the relationship broke down, and this is what we have emphasized, both Jack and myself, in the webinar, in the podcast that will be tomorrow, is what should Israel be aware of, what we should beware, and what we should expect and demand of Turkey. And I would say the most important thing with Turkey today is requesting symmetry and reciprocity. What do I mean by that? If, God forbid, there is another operation in Gaza or anywhere else, we expect the Turks to stay out of it, from a rhetorical point of view. If there are some issues and unrest on Temple Mount, we expect the Turks to be out of the picture altogether and respect Israel's domestic, Israel's sovereignty and Israel domestic issues, just as we respect the Turks. We do not scold the Turks on the Armenian genocide, or and it cost us a lot by not doing that. But again, out of respect and out of our interest as well. But these interests are important to Turkey. So this is what we would expect from Turkey, to stay out of this, out of domestic issues in Israel. Kurds, just as we do not host Kurdish leaders, we expect them to oust Hamas leaders and Hamas operatives from Turkey. So these are, I would say, the two issues for a basis for stable relationship in the past that could really avert any blowups or any explosions. This is something which is very important, and I hope that this was put in kind of understandings, if not written, at least verbal understandings between the negotiators of Israel and the Turks. The chief negotiator on Israel part was Alon Ushpiz, which is the Director General of the Foreign Policy in Jerusalem. He's a great guy. He used to work for me in Washington at the embassy, so I know he's very capable and understanding nuances, understanding brand policies. So I hope this was the case. And one more thing that I would expect the Turks is to be much more cooperative when it comes to NATO. You know that Turkey is a NATO member, and the NATO membership grants them a veto power, which they have used in the past to block Israeli collaborations with NATO. This also should be out of the question for them to really hinder any relationship with NATO. So what I'm trying to say is that the relationship between Turkey and Israel should be solely based on the bilateral interest and the bilateral volume of activities, be it commerce, economy, tourism, and many other things that we do together. I don't think that we will ever resume the same intimacy we had with the Turks when it came to, before Erdogan came to power. We were quite strategic partners. You know that, Benjamin, in terms of intelligence cooperation, in terms of joint military exercises, I don't see this coming. We will continue to do joint military exercises with others in the region, whether it's in the Gulf region, or whether it's in the eastern basin of the Mediterranean, namely Cyprus and Greece, Italy, by the way. Other countries are joining as well. So this is I would say how I would map now what are Israel's expectations from the relationship. But at the end of the day, it's a very positive sign which empowers Israel. It strengthens Israel's position in the region and internationally as well. And last point I want to mention here is that we have to remember that Turkey is a neighbor of Iran. So by normalizing relations with Turkey, it also is a signal to Iran that Israel is becoming more influential. And Azerbaijan, which is another neighbor of Iran, is a very good friend of Israel in many areas. And so it's strengthening Israel's position all around.
Well,
Now, I'm sorry.
Yes.
You asked me why did Erdogan do it, And as I mentioned, as we do it from a position of power or strength, he does it from a position of weakness.
And vulnerability, severe
the
vulnerability.
economy of is just about ruined. And for the first time, I think since he took office, he is sliding in the polls, behind or lower than the 50%, to the extent that he is not certain that he is a shoo-in anymore for the next elections. So he needs to strengthen the economy. The only way for him to do it is also through investments from Gulf countries, which Israel has some influence now, from the United States and Europe. And also he needs President Biden. And the road for President Biden is through Jerusalem. He also understands that, hence this, I would say, urgency on the Turkish side to normalize relations with Israel at this point.
I do hope that President Biden won't make the same error that President Barack Obama made, which was beginning to eye Turkey as potentially a replacement for the state of Israel as a central strategic ally in the region. That was something that I think emboldened Erdogan, if you remember, way back when, in that time frame of 2008, 2009, when he stormed off stage, as I mentioned, and then worsened relations and worsened them again. Do you think that Biden is likely to follow suit and start to look to Turkey? You mentioned that, for example, Israel will not return to the strategic alliance that once we had, or to the military training and exercise that we once shared with the Turks. Do you think that, just as we will not go back to where once we were, that the American president will not return to eyeing Turkey potentially as a replacement for Israel? Surely they realize there actually isn't a replacement for the state of Israel in the region.
Yes,
now.
Well, I hope so. Biden, unlike former presidents, he and his party today, especially growing section of his party, are very sensitive to human rights. And in Turkey, human rights are non-existent. You know that in Turkey, basically, there are more incarcerated media people and journalists than in any other country in the world, more than even in Iran. So this is something that always, I think, Biden and the Democrats would hold against Erdogan. Just the same case is in Egypt. And, the fact that the relationship between Egypt and the United States are good is because of the good offices of Israel here. And the Egyptians very much appreciate that. And hence the very close cooperation now that we have with Egypt on military, on intelligence, and many other issues. And the same goes with Turkey. I hope, that Biden will not be fooled by Erdogan and the Turks. Although, that there is a major American air base in Incirlik in Turkey, and it's a strategic, where some strategic squadrons of the American Air Force are positioned. So of course it's always very, very, I would say, always very sensitive. But I do hope that this will not again be the case where he's giving him to Erdogan a blank check. I don't think this will be the case. There is one issue which also will be discussed trilaterally, that is Washington, Ankara, and Jerusalem, is this energy policy. And this is another reason why Erdogan has now come forward with normalizing relations with Israel, is that he really would like a part of Israel's growing fields of natural gas in our economic waters. And he would very much like that this gas will flow to Europe. Especially now, it's very important to kind of pick up the slack from from not having the Russian natural gas. He would like it to flow through Europe. And there are very advanced negotiations between Israel and Greece to do it through Greece. The Americans, there was a rumor, which I have not managed to corroborate, that they have hinted that their preference would be to do it through Turkey for many reasons. Of course, nothing is concluded yet, but this is something to really watch very carefully. Where will the gas flow from? Turkey or Greece? In any case, it really strengthens the cards in Israel's hand, also vis-a-vis the Europeans. And I believe that more good and pleasant surprises will be found in our economic quarters.
Good stuff, Danny. And you and Chuck will be talking about that and more. I remind everybody in the IDDF podcast, which is going to be released tomorrow. And Alan has put a link to that podcast in the chat. If anybody wants to subscribe now, you'll get that straight to your device when it is published tomorrow. Now, I would love to talk to you more about Turkey, but I know, as I mentioned, you and Chuck are doing a deeper dive tomorrow. So let's turn to the elections, but let's pivot off what you just said, because there is an implication for this restoration of ties for Israel's acting Prime Minister Yair Lapid in the upcoming elections, is there not? There is nothing, I would say, like a restoration of relations to bolster the foreign policy credentials of a prime minister. But my question to you is, will this restoration give Lapid anything akin to a political boost? This is not the grand slam of the normalization of ties with the Gulf states, for example. It's with a country toward which many Israelis turn a skeptical eye. What do you think this will do for Yair Lapid as he seeks to win the election that is going to take place on November 1st of this year?
Well, Anthony, I'm not sure much. I mean, we have seen it in the polls. The polls have not really bounced. The same goes with Naftali Bennett, which I think did a good job as a prime minister, but it did not reflect in the public support, which again goes to show that elections today, not just in Israel, it's all over, certainly in the United States, are elections of identities, politics of identities, not ideologies, not policies, not parties, and it's basically personalities. And this election here that we will have in November 1st, which is going to be the 5th election in 3 years, are basically on one issue: for and against Bibi Netanyahu. And in this, and Bibi's personality looms so large, with a real overcast on the political arena here, that you may have personalities or politicians like Naftali Bennett or Yair Lapid or Benny Gantz or Gadi Eisenkot, a very good friend of mine, former chief of staff, who joined now the Benny Gantz party. But you see, there is no movement of the needle in the polls. So again, people will pretty much be entrenched in their own positions of identities, and not so much be influenced by any performance, which was a fairly good performance by this last government that served us here for the last, I would say, 14, 15 months.
Well, you mentioned another country as it's almost impossible not to do when you were talking to me about Turkey and the region and so forth, and that, of course, is Iran. And Danny, we all recall that in March 2015, then Prime Minister, now leader of the opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, addressed himself to a joint session of the US Congress in order to oppose the impending JCPOA, or the Iran deal, as it's oftentimes called. And he expressed there publicly at the podium that, quote, "This deal is so very bad, we're better off without it." Now, he did so in direct opposition to a central foreign policy plank of then President Barack Obama. And he repeatedly stated, Danny, that no deal is better than a bad deal. Now, fast forward to today, in a briefing to the foreign media, Prime Minister Yair Lapid expressed that the current deal is a bad deal, which is merely a play on the same theme, in my opinion. And what I would like to ask you is this: the substance of the perspectives of both leaders, Yair Lapid and Benjamin Netanyahu, seems almost to be without any difference whatsoever, but the style seems markedly different, with the Lapid government determined to avoid a public showdown between Israel and the United States on the issue of the now again impending, it looks like, JCPOA or Iran deal. So my question to you, Danny, is who is right in their approach, Netanyahu or Lapid? Or does the approach to stopping the JCPOA ultimately constitute nothing more than a distinction without a difference? Should we roll this argument to a public showdown, or is Lapid more wise and more sagacious by taking his story to the foreign media?
That's a very, very good question. And I'll tell you, at this moment that we speak, I would say the jury is still out. You know, which one is was smarter in dealing with this dispute with the United States. One thing is certain, and I think it's very important for anyone to understand, especially outside of the borders of Israel, foes and friends alike, that on the issue of Iran, there is no daylight between Lapid and Netanyahu. Basically, there is a consensus in Israel, wall-to-wall consensus in Israel on the issue of Iran, which, by the way, I think should show that once there is such a great legitimacy in Israel for doing anything that we need to do to stop Iran, I think that Iranians and anybody else should understand that when Israel says that all the options are on the table, and if Iran is not stopped by diplomacy, Israel will have to revert to other means. Not only we mean business, but this is also going to be a very effective business. It's not going to be just like the war in Lebanon in 2000 and in 1982, you know, when the country was split. Here, the country is speaking in one voice. Now, we have the benefit of experience from 2015. And Bibi Netanyahu, you know, he is the most intelligent, capable, visionary leader, absolutely. But of course, visionary leaders also make mistakes. And I believe that if we measure it by results, I would say that Bibi Netanyahu did not succeed in his approach, because on the one hand, he did not change the agreement. He did not stop the agreement. The agreement was signed, and notwithstanding his position, and he's going to Congress, as you mentioned, in 2015. And maybe there was also some negative consequences in the sense that Israel was not included in the room. So our influence was maybe less than it could have been had we not been so much going out front against Obama, almost personally, and against the United States. So we know that we could not stop it. Now we see the same strategy of trying to stop the agreement, but in with different tactics of being not so, I would say, vociferous about it, trying more backroom negotiations. And I'm not sure that this very much worked either. So that goes back. So we have to understand the, Israel's place here. And there are much bigger interests here to play, which is, I would start with the elections in November for Biden. He would like to close the Iranian file behind him and show himself as a great negotiator and leader. There is the price of oil. You know, once Iran is out of sanctions, price also something which is very much the interest of all the major powers of the world, certainly the negotiators, the P5+1, which are the European countries, the United States, and of course Russia and China. So we should really understand what can be done and what cannot be done. It is not to say that we should not push our interests all the way and bring it up to the decision makers. And we have done it not only with the United States, but also with Germany, with France, and with United Kingdom. Yair Lapid, without stop, with Macron, the president of France, with Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and of course with Biden as we speak. Israel's National Security Advisor is in Washington to discuss it with Jake Sullivan, his counterpart in DC. So we have to understand from the start what we can do and what we cannot do. Maybe we can, in a marginal way, maybe we can change things. I believe that the pressure that Israel put publicly on not delisting the Iranian Revolutionary Guard from the terror list, I think made its mark. So again, it's not I would say something which is in the mainstream of the agreement. It has nothing to do with the nuclear issues, but it is also very important. The Iranian demand to close the 3 files. What are the 3 files? These are the 3 sites that a residue of nuclear material, namely enriched uranium, was found. And this was found, I think it can be, whoever wants to deny it can deny it, but this was detected through and by Israeli intelligence sources. It was brought into the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy, which are now investigating. Of course, the Iranians would not allow them to investigate. And as part of the Iranian demand to sign the new nuclear deal was that the IAEA will not investigate. And we again here were very, very adamant that it should be investigated. The United States, as I understand now, is also very much demanding that these 3 cases will continue to be investigated. Otherwise, it's going to be a hoax. But it's another sign how the Iranians, try to fool and cheat as they can. So we may change some things marginally, but not into the main. And that brings me to the next, let's say, level of thinking or approach. What Israel should do is understanding that we cannot really change in a material way the nuclear agreement. Then we should go and ask for appropriate compensation from the United States. And that means more munitions and weapons and more cooperation, and also a commitment by the United States that indeed, if the Iranians will breach the agreement, or if the Iranians will try to break out to a nuclear capability, that the United States will either do it by itself or join Israel or NATO or the US-led international coalition will stop Iran even militarily. If we get these commitments, then I'm not very happy with the agreement, but assurances and some kind of safety valves going into the future.
So I just have a couple of points to make in response to what you said. The first is, it's correct, and I agree with you. Of course, there's no means of making a case otherwise that Benjamin Netanyahu failed to bring about an end to the JCPOA, failed to ensure the demise of the JCPOA. But he did have another duty at that time, and his duty was to promote far and wide, with all of the force and all of the vigor and all of the rigor that he could muster in his unique way, with his own unique powers of articulation and his own deep knowledge of the landscape of the United States legislature and legislative branch and the relationship. He had an obligation as the Prime Minister of the Jewish state to press our case so that everybody understood what was at stake. And I have to tell you, as a just one poshetiyit, one simple Jew, I struggle to recall a time where I felt greater pride in hearing my prime minister, whether it be Benjamin Netanyahu or anybody else, doing exactly that, pressing that case forward, making our case, letting the world know that we have a voice. And I think that on that level, he succeeded. And he succeeded, as we say in Israel, bagadol. He succeeded in a big, big way. And he succeeded in a way that the entire pro-Israel lobby and pro-Israel movement in the United States, I would argue, absolutely failed. And I wonder, therefore, is it possible that Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett go the route of quiet conversations simply because they don't actually have an option other than to do that? They're not Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, I should emphasize, I have voted in opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu over the past 3 elections. So everybody should be very, very clear about my position there. But I wonder, the gravitas, they don't have the institutional knowledge. Nobody is inviting them to speak to a joint session of the United States Congress. And that's the second thought that I have. And the third thought that I have is, I caution those who would rely on assurances coming from, quite frankly, the Biden administration and the political left over there in the United States of America. I think there is a downturn, a market downturn, it has to be said, in pro-Israel support among some of the superstars of the Democratic Party. And there's no getting away from that. I think that Joe Biden is the last gasping breath of deeply entrenched pro-Israel support and familiarity. But he doesn't have a successor in that capacity. And therefore, I would argue that agreements might not be worth the paper upon which they are written coming from the left. We've already had candidates who have vied for the nomination to be president from the Democratic Party saying that they will condition military aid to Israel on Israel's policies in Judea and Samaria, for example. That's not a particularly tenable situation. It's not slowing down, it's gaining speed. And just lest anybody think that I'm making a partisan broadcast here, I'm very aware that there are significant problems of anti-Semitism on the right, Marjorie Taylor Greene and her nonsense, and goodness knows what else has come out of that party of late. But when it comes to assurances and commitment to the State of Israel, I have to say, it's a no contest in my mind. Do you really think, Danny, please tell me if you do, just say, Benjamin, I disagree. But do you really think that these assurances that you're speaking of compensation, do you really think they're worth the paper they'd be printed on? I suspect you don't, but tell me if I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. Israel's experience show, in 1967, we had assurances from the United States that were not fulfilled. After Nasser and Egypt stormed into the Sinai, pulled out the peacekeeping force against all the agreements. Absolutely, Israel can never, ever rely on international guarantees. And it's not just Israel. You can see the Ukraine cynical, is very self-serving, it's very hypocritical. If they do anything, it's always too late and too little. I mean, we know it more than anyone else, as we lost 6 million of our brothers and sisters because the international community did not react, and they knew about it. It's not that they didn't know what was happening in Europe under the Nazi regime. So no, we should not rely on that. It's just an extra, let's say, maybe the commitment is just an issue that would give us more legitimacy if they are not fulfilled. But there's no doubt that Israel should always rely and be able to defend itself by itself. This is the #1 thing, and no matter what happens. And this is something that those who are, let's say, for this agreement now that may be signed, in Vienna, what they say is that this agreement, and I'm not sure I'm totally agreeing, but that this agreement will give Israel more time to prepare. So, and we know Israel did not make it a secret that we now are preparing an option, a military option in case, everything just, falls and goes down in flames. We will have to do what we need to do. There are still some things that we would have some shortcuts if we got some equipments from the United States. One thing that I can think of is maybe this bunker busters, and it's not that we are helpless here, because first of all, we have our own munitions and we have different tactics that we can do something which could be like a similar effect like the buster bunker with other means. But in any case, it's good to have the United States more involved in this, but absolutely we should rely only on ourselves. And as you said, Bibi Netanyahu is unique. Nobody has the gravitas of Bibi Netanyahu, not in Israel, and I would say not in the world today. I don't see any international leader who comes close to Bibi Netanyahu in terms of charisma, in terms of articulation, in terms of vision. But some would say that after 15 years as prime minister, and again, I'm not partisan here either, that it's time to give somebody else to take the helm. And again, and this is the last thing I'm going to say on this, is that we saw, all those Bibi supporters said, well, if he is out of power, everything is going to be just destroyed. And this was not the case. Right. Both Lapid and Bennett showed that, they still, they also have a steady hand on the helm. We have to remember, it's not the prime minister, one person, who's responsible for everything. We have a very capable, very responsible, very experienced military and defense establishment, which is always helpful to whoever is democratically elected here in Israel.
Well, Danny, we've got about 25 minutes left. We're going to finish this at 8:15 here in Israel. So that's 1:15 over in the United States. And I want to get through a few points, and you couldn't have lobbed this up better for me with your final comments in response to my comments, because the question I'd like to ask you is this. As we go in here in Israel to another election campaign, the one that will culminate on November 1st of this year, Netanyahu has always portrayed himself as being what's called Mr. Security, the man who served in Sayeret Matkal, an officer there in Israel's most elite military unit. He participated and was injured in the operation to free the Sabena aircraft hostages. And his immediate family, of course, has sacrificed greatly for the state of Israel. His brother, Yoni, of blessed memory, was tragically killed in the raid on Entebbe, Israel's most famous and most daring known military operation. All of those things are true, Danny, and all of those things are facts. They are facts, not really to be conjured with. But then comes the inference, and the inference is that only Netanyahu can keep Israel secure, and that only Netanyahu can conquer the threat of terror. Well, that inference, as Netanyahu would like it to be, that inference took quite a thumping recently when Yair Lapid oversaw Operation Breaking Dawn quite successfully and ably in the eyes of most Israelis. So, Danny, it doesn't seem, again, that Yair Lapid got a major bump in the polls as a result of the operation dubbed Breaking Dawn, but Israeli polls are notoriously confounded when the election results actually come in. Do you think Lapid is in a strong position as far as security is concerned, given his prosecution of Operation Breaking Dawn in the context of these upcoming elections?
Well, I think, Benjamin, that there is a gap between his actual performance and the perception in the public. His actual performance was, I would say, pretty good. The results of Breaking Dawn was good. better than other operations that even were headed by Bibi Netanyahu. And again, it goes to show that it's basically the system, the establishment, the entire, I would say, bureaucracy, whether it's in the defense department here, defense ministry, and of course the military itself, and of course intelligence. The Shin Bet was very instrumental in this last Breaking Dawn operation. But I'm not sure that this is reflected in the polls or in how the public sees Yair Lapid. Still, as you mentioned, Netanyahu is Mr. Security, but we have to remember that it is, or I would say, it's very dangerous to hang Israel's security and interests on one person and one person alone. Because at some point, he will not be able to be prime minister forever. Yeah. And so Israel should know, there is a saying in Hebrew, Lo Alman Israel. That means, Israel has a lot of resources, and fortunately, we are not now dependent on one person or on one factor, or not even on one state. Although, notwithstanding this great relationship we have with the United States, still the United States is our best friend and ally. It's the indispensable country for us, but still, we cannot rely on any one factor. We have to hedge our bets. We have to invest in more than just one personality or one party. And in that case, I think the Israeli system will become healthier when we have a plethora of candidates. Sorry.
Well, we're certainly going to have a plethora of candidates. And in fact, the current Knesset was formed by a collective of very straight bedfellows who coalesced around the joint goal, basically of ousting Benjamin Netanyahu from power. But they've shown themselves unable to maintain a stable majority in government, and thus these new elections are now upon us. And anyone but Bibi platform, Danny, does not actually a functioning government make, it seems. So we now see strange occurrences that are taking place among components of that government. On the right, and I want our listeners to pay close attention to this, on the right of the political spectrum, the Yamina party, which was previously held by Naftali Bennett and now by Ayelet Shaked, that party is now hemorrhaging support, and party members from there are defecting. Tzionut Hadatit, the religious Zionism party, which is helmed by Bezalel Smotrich, that defected from Bennett because they said Bennett was not right-wing enough for their liking. That party is now embattled from its right flank by Otzma Yehudit, Itamar Ben-Gvir's party. Yamina and Tzionut Hadatit might both fail to cross the electoral threshold, and Itamar Ben-Gvir of Otzma Yehudit is ascendant in the poll. So I know that I've thrown a lot at you there. You know all of it already, but I'd like to ask you to describe the situation of the Israeli political right. And I'd like you to tell us how vital the outcomes of each of these three parties, these smaller right-wing parties, Yamina, Tzionut Hadatit, and Otzma Yehudit, are to the ambitions of Benjamin Netanyahu to return as prime minister.
Yes, and I will add another party, which is the Ruach Tzionit, the Zionist spirit of Ayelet Shaked. So basically what you have described very accurately, Benjamin, is fragmentation. Of Israeli political system, and it stems out of, in my mind, a very flawed political system. And my thinking of really changing, of revamping the political system here in terms of electoral reform and government reform, more like in the United States, but not everything, just to take the good things out of the American system, the good things out of the British system. Right now, we have a very convoluted system, which on the one hand, Israel's political system is the most democratic. Why? Because everyone can be represented. There is no hurdle. The threshold to run is very, very minimal. The system is a system of power sharing and not winner takes all, like in the United States, for instance. So that really shows the great, and you see the acquiescence of my dog. He agrees to everything I say. I'm sure everybody hears that. I'm sorry about that.
Don't worry.
But no, we're taking care of it now. In any case, the fragmentation stems from this flawed political system. The strengths, some would say, some political analysts would say that the fact that everyone can be represented in the Israeli system, although the rhetoric is very, very, I would say, could be even inflammatory, but it is a way to deflect all the tensions among the different segments of society. It's all being up and discussed in the political realm and not in a violent way like in the Arab countries, or what euphemistically was called the Arab Spring, which became a Islamist winter. So it is true that Israel is Arik Sharon, my good friend and boss, mentor, said that Israel is more democracy. He used to mock, facetiously at the United States, where winner takes all, so it's not such a democracy in Israel. But to be, democracy is also about effective government and governance, and this fragmentation does not allow stability and predictability in the political system, which is a big minus. This is why we have to find an equilibrium. Right now, I would say the axis or the weight goes more toward representation than to governability, and we have to move it a little bit to governability. That would have maybe, or not maybe, for sure, would have prevented all this fragmentation. Now, when we talk today about 4 different small parties on the right, the danger for the right wing camp and for Bibi Netanyahu specifically, what could prevent him from getting back into the prime minister's position, is if one or more than these 4 parties that we mentioned, small parties, will not pass the threshold. It's a minimal threshold in comparison to other countries. The threshold in Israel is now 3.25%. That means a party that is running that does not collect more than 3.25% of all the votes is nixed. They are not part of the game, and all the votes that this party got are just being canceled. They are not counted. 3.25% is equivalent to 4 seats. 4 seats in the Knesset out of the 120 that we have altogether. So once you have these parties on the right not running together, there is a risk that 1 or 2 of them will not get the 3.25%. And that means all these votes are going to go into the wastebasket, and they're going to be subtracted from Bibi Netanyahu's coalition. And this by itself can give the other camp the upper hand. So this is why we hear now Bibi Netanyahu with pleas, with extended now pressure. Now he's going up on record to call them to actually run together. Whether they will or not, egos are playing a big role here.
Now, that's very, very interesting, and we will watch and we will live and we will learn what happens over there on the right. have to say that Ben Gvir's ascendance doesn't surprise me. It actually doesn't surprise me, and I'll explain why in due course. But let's turn to the left for a moment. We saw an interesting turn of events. Meretz, a party as far left as I would say one can go while remaining within the mainstream, underwent a leadership contest, the candidates for which were Yair Golan, the former deputy chief of staff of the Israel Defense Forces, and he's actually a publishing expert here at the MirYam Institute. And his opponent was Zahava Galon, a blast from the past who led the party from 2012 to 2018 and returned basically, Danny, from the political wilderness to run for the leadership of that party. And she won. She won that race. And it feels to me as though the left has made a capital mistake, regardless of what I think, and Yair Golan knows well that I disagree with his political views, but I certainly have no question as to the sincerity of his viewpoints as he espouses them. But it seems to me that the left has made the mistake of taking a step backwards, not forward, with this outcome. So what are your thoughts on the state of the Israeli left at this time? Do they even believe that they're ready for leadership and for a leadership role in government, or are they just there to be, you know, these sectoral parties? What do you make of it all, Danny?
Well, so the Israeli left is also fragmented, but less so than the right. If on the right, we're talking about 4 different parties, you know, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, Ayelet Shaked, you know, and the Beit Yehudi. On the right side, we have only 2 parties. It's Meretz and Labor. And quite honestly, you know, you really need a huge magnifying glasses to find any differences between Meretz and Labor. And here also, just as Bibi Netanyahu calling on the right to unite and run together as one pack, one party, Yair Lapid is calling on Meretz and Labor also to run together. And right now, it seems that this will not happen. And here again, if one of these parties on the right, Labor or Meretz, does not pass the threshold, then pretty much then the left has no chance of maintaining, you know, the leadership. About Meretz itself, well, they still call themselves a Zionist party, which I respect very much. I believe that really, I knew many of their former leaders, you know, Yossi Beilin, Yossi Sarid. I know that, you know, they came from left, maybe even far left, but they were true Zionists. Really, Israel's interests were in the highest priority for them, Jewish identity and Jewish continuity, although they looked at it differently, you know, and basically the difference between left and right is on the Palestinian issue. I believe the left is very naive, but you know, you have to respect their position. In any case, I think that also, like you, that Meretz, as they keep, you know, reiterating their subscription or their commitment to Zionism, that they have missed an opportunity with Yair Golan to show, first of all, rejuvenation. You have a new type of leader, and not bringing, as you say, the blast from the past. And I believe that he would have been able to bring in more, you know, more votes from different segments of Israel's society, and not same old, same old. And also, maybe he would have been able to more easily maybe run together with Labor than it is now. But again, egos play a big role in politics, especially when it comes to Jewish politics. So right now, it's a toss-up. It's hard to predict if there will be any kind of reorganization of parties towards the elections. We will know soon. September 15th is the deadline for the parties to register their lists. So by that time, it's in about 2 weeks and a half, we will know what will happen, and then we can reconvene and analyze what are the ramifications and the chances of each side.
Well, I want to ask you one last question, Danny, and that's on the nature of international political discourse. And incidentally, this is why I'm not surprised by Ben Gvir's ascendance in the polls, because Ben Gvir, you know what he's about. You might agree, you might disagree, you might love him, you might loathe him, but you know exactly what he is about. There's no equivocation when it comes to him articulating his policy positions. And I feel that here when it comes to the political discourse, actually not just here, but internationally, political discourse is continuing. I really do feel to plumb ever newer and lower depths. Very little of substance is ever transmitted or debated. And unfortunately, Danny, I have to say that I think Israel has allowed itself to follow that zeitgeist. Unlike in some other countries, though, we have matters of security, stability, and destiny that we absolutely must find a way to resolve. And I don't believe that we can allow ourselves to engage in vacuous, ad hominem political conversation and interaction. We need to know, for example, do we not, who is going to seek to pursue a two-state solution? I'm totally opposed to a two-state solution, incidentally. That's why I want to know who is going to seek to implement a two-state solution so that we can oppose them with different ideas and viewpoints. We need to know who will seek to apply sovereignty over areas of Judea and Samaria. We need to know who will act to conclusively end Iran's nuclear ambitions. And we also need to know, Danny, and this is particularly close to your heart given your international career, who is going to safeguard Jewish communities abroad and protect the rights of Jews anywhere and everywhere to make Aliyah? And how do they plan to achieve all of these? These are the questions, the basic questions. I'm not going to go into the cost of living because our audience here is largely an audience abroad, but these are the basic high-level questions that we need to know the answers to, or the proposed answers to, from our political so-called leaders. So I'd like to ask you whether you feel that in this round of elections, we're actually going to get to hear more of the policy positions and from the political candidates than we did the last time. And might we even see a debate, Danny, between the leading candidates wherein their ideas are challenged and tested by rigorous questioning from their opponents? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I wish we would have a debate. I think that's important, also for the democratic process, for a transparent process. I think I'm not sure. We have not had a debate like that for the last, I don't know, can't remember, even 4, 5, 6, maybe since for the last 20 years we did not have any debate before elections. But here I would say, if you, even without the debate, I think it is very easy to assume what would be the policy of the right, let's say, of a Likud government vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Here, all the center-right parties are very, very, I would say, definite about it. No Palestinian state, absolutely. Although, to be fair, never did they, when they had power, including Bibi Netanyahu, never did they annex the West Bank or any parts of the West Bank. So this is also something that we have to keep in our mind. But definitely, I do not see any of the right-wing parties change their attitude or their policies if they are in power. On the center and center-left, it's much, much more fuzzy. First of all, you have the two left parties, basically Labor and Meretz, which say outright they are for a Palestinian state. I think Meretz would even go to say for a Palestinian state, based on the 1967 borders, you know, the Clinton or the Camp David and framework and all that. Now, where is the real issue and confusion and ambiguity is in the center. That means Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid. With them, you do not hear about never a Palestinian state. So
Right.
these two, I would say, could change either way. But again, in their defense, I would say that they do say that at their position that at this point there is no partner, there is not even any sense to discuss any outcome because there is no partner, and both of them say that in any case, of course, Israel will always have its security interests as a priority. But if you ask me, both Gantz and Lapid, if the circumstances are right,
Yeah,
they would certainly enter a negotiation process with the Palestinians with the objective of a Palestinian state, something that on the right side they will never do.
And they would fail in those negotiations, I dare say. I believe that they would fail and fail pretty miserably. Well, Danny, that's the end of our time here. I have to say, you've been very, very gracious. You've continued my education, and I know that you will have a fabulous conversation published tomorrow at the MirYam Institute podcast, the IDDF podcast, the Israel Defense and Diplomacy Forum. We've got a link here in the chat box. If anybody wants to subscribe to it, it will be delivered to your device directly and for free. An extremely high-level conversation between you, former ambassadors to the United States of America, and Chuck Freilich, former Deputy National Security Advisor, and you'll agree and you will disagree. And you'll do so with aplomb and good grace. And I'm looking forward to the next time we meet. I wonder, just aloud, will we see another incarnation of Bibi Netanyahu as Prime Minister and Donald Trump as President? I will tell you, I hope not, but I think we might do. That's only my view. Others might disagree with my view, but I think it's possible at the very least. It's not beyond the realm of possibility, but I personally would not like to see it. So we'll discuss that if it does come about. Certainly not impossible. But I will tell you, I'm very grateful, Danny, and I know you've just come back from Australia, so I'll conclude my comments by saying, g'day, mate, and we'll reconvene soon enough, okay?
A very friendly country to us, Australia and the Australians.
Wonderful. At least there, I think there's an ever-broadening circle of those coming about, and Australia is certainly a stalwart therein, and I'm looking forward to the next time we meet, and my thanks to our listeners, and of course to my colleagues at the MirYam Institute. Take care, Danny. All the very best.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.